Okay, let me give you some advice on the way you should write your applications from what I've learned so far as a junior programmer. First, you'll see that in each application we will build, the topmost line in the .py file is going to be the following: a hash sign, an exclamation sign, /user/bin/env space and Python. This is called the shebang line in Python. This is a funny name. Most programmers use it, so we will use it too. Adding the shebang line means you can invoke the script directly by using a dot and a / followed by the script name into the Linux terminal, assuming, of course, you have the permissions to execute that file. I have attached a link in the additional section of this lecture to linuxcommand.org, where you can find more details on Linux file permissions. Now, let's create a Python file and see the difference between using and not using the shebang line. Let's go ahead and copy this. We will need it into our file. Okay. So let's say touch. Let's name our file shebang. Shebang.py. Let's go into the file. I for insert. Inside this file, let's type in the shebang line and then a simple print statement. Let's paste the line. Okay, and print testing. And a new line. Okay, let's save the file and run it. So Python shebang.py. Okay, it works. Now let's use the Linux way of executing files. This will be a dot, a / and shebang.py. And here's why we need to change the permissions. We can do this with the following Linux command: chmod 777 and shebang.py. Now let's try this one more time. Okay, this works too. You now have two ways to execute the same file. Now let's delete the shebang line and run the file both ways again. So let's get into the file. Let's go ahead and delete this and save the file. Now let's run it first in the old regular way using the Python command. Okay, it works. Nice. Now let's run it in the Linux way. So dot and a / shebang.py. Okay, this time we got an error. Linux didn't know how to execute the code inside shebang.py, so omitting this line just means Python has to be invoked manually with the Python command up here. Okay, enough about the shebang line. Let's go on to coding best practices. In the additional section of this lecture, you can find a link to PEP 8, which is the official style guide for Python code. In this guide, you will learn a lot of best practices for writing code in Python. But let me give you some basic best practices which I have learned while writing Python code. Let's go into the file from the previous lecture, thread.py, and let me add a few things first. So vim thread.py. Okay, I for insert. Okay, one more here. Run the function 5 times. Okay, let's see the file. Okay, as I said earlier in the course, one crucial thing to be careful about is indentation. You should always be consistent about your indentation. I would recommend using the tab key pressed once for one indentation level. I use this in my code and haven't had a problem until now. Another thing to keep in mind is that you should always write your import statements at the beginning of the file, before any other lines of code. Now maybe the biggest advantage of Python is the readability of the code. You should keep your code as readable and as clean as possible. For example, each time you create a variable and assign it a value, It's better to leave a space between the equal sign and the characters you type in on the left and on the right side of the equal sign. Another thing that might make your code more readable is leaving a blank line or multiple blank lines between functions, classes, or any other code blocks. You see I have a blank line here and another one over here. If you feel the need for any comments anywhere inside your code, use the hash sign for single line comments and, triple quotes for multi-line comments. They will help you 6 months later when you return to your code. Trust me on that. Also try to name your variables, functions, or classes as suggestive as you can, thinking about what that function does. For example, if you have a function that simply adds two numbers, you should better name it SUMXY, for example, instead of just function1. Okay, I know this is a very basic example, but you got the point. I encourage you to read the entire list of best practices for coding in the link I told you about. Just keep in mind that keeping your code clean, readable, and compliant will help you a lot in your coding adventures. Starting with the next lecture, we are finally going to dive into networking using Python.